Hey guys, it's Tyken here. I'm back with another video for you, so let's dive right in. Oh, and don't forget to hit the like button and leave a comment. Let me know which manhwa you want to see next. Let's go! Kshamil gossip ran rampant through the city. The locals could hardly believe the young master's sudden change in behavior, questioning whether the smile they received was real or a figment of their imagination. On the training grounds, the guards watched with skepticism. The nobleman had been working hard lately, maintaining a rigorous routine that no one expected to last this long. The sudden determination raised suspicions among the men. To them, this attempt to straighten up seemed to have come out of nowhere, perhaps too soon for someone with his history. Oblivious to the external comments, the boy closed his eyes. He needed total focus and introspection for what he was about to accomplish. Steelguard, at 16, was determined to change his fate. With the grimoire shining in his hands, he channeled his energy, promising himself that he would succeed this time. However, memories of another reality still haunted him. The scene shifted to a dark alley, where ragged breathing betrayed fear and exhaustion. In that grim vision, he saw himself trapped and helpless. Before his captor, all that remained was the physical pain and humiliation of a brutal and bloody defeat. That tragic fate was the opposite of what was expected of his lineage. After all, he was born into the prestigious Steelguard family, the ancestral rulers who had dominated the North for generations. The history of his blood was marked by living legends, such as Laziken Steelguard, a knight of mythical power revered by everyone in the Empire. His father had also been a prodigy, a hero in shining armor. In comparison, Eren felt the crushing weight of having been just a mediocre third-class knight. The contrast was painful. Downcast and isolated, the young man felt the deep shame of not living up to the greatness that the Steelguard name demanded. In that past life, the world did not forgive his weakness. He became a target of public mockery, remembered as the shameful count who lost his territory and tarnished the family's honor. But even bloodied and on the verge of death, something burned within him. The humiliation ignited a spark of fury and clarity in his dying gaze. He had only wanted to be a decent lord, to honor his father's memory. However, regret consumed him as he realized that he had lost all his wealth and legacy through naivety. Eren found himself trapped and injured, at the mercy of a relentless torturer. The man in black merely consulted his notes coldly, ignoring the prisoner's deplorable state. The young man tried to protest, panic evident in his expression as he desperately sought a way to interact with his captor. However, his attempt to speak was brutally interrupted. The man struck him violently with the very object he was holding, silencing any resistance. Eren spat blood, stunned by the sudden impact. It was then that his eyes fixed on something specific, recognizing the object that was being displayed. The torturer seemed uninterested in the physical pain he caused, turning his attention to the record in his hands as if it were mere bureaucracy. Despair took over Eren as he realized what was happening. He begged for it to be returned, his voice filled with urgency and fear. It was a sword ornament, dangling in the air. The object seemed to have an importance that went far beyond its material value at that moment. With utter disdain, the man in black let the amulet fall to the dirty floor, landing right in front of the fallen prisoner's face. That item evoked bitter memories for Eren. He recalled that it was just one of the many artifacts he had been tricked into buying in the past. Without warning, the captor grabbed the young man's face and forced a red liquid down his throat. Eren had no choice but to swallow the potion. To his surprise, he felt his body react immediately. Eren was confused, mentally questioning why his tormentor would be healing his wounds at that moment. The answer came quickly and terrifyingly. The man prepared new torture tools, revealing that the healing was only to ensure that the prisoner could endure more pain. The torturer wielded a sharp blade with a sadistic look, ready to restart his macabre work with surgical precision. Anger and helplessness mixed within Eren. He clenched his teeth tightly, fury burning in his eyes at this calculated cruelty. Suddenly, the young man began to laugh maniacally. The torturer watched the scene, concluding that his victim's mind had finally broken, which might be better for what was to come. Blood splattered violently in the darkness. A guttural sound of pain escaped, echoing through the dark environment. Eren choked, the air lacking in his lungs. He coughed forcefully, feeling the metallic taste dominate his senses as he struggled to breathe. However, amidst the agony, a light shone upon him. Tears streamed from his eyes, mixing with the blood, as he glimpsed something beyond the pain. His breathing became heavy and erratic. His exhausted body trembled, struggling to maintain consciousness in the face of extreme physical suffering. Suddenly, the ornament began to react. A bluish energy emanated from the object, breaking through the darkness and indicating that something supernatural was about to happen. A sharp sound resonated in his mind. The young man's silhouette wavered, as if his very existence was being processed by an unknown force. Aaron blinked, confused by what he saw. Before his eyes, a mysterious interface appeared in the air, displaying symbols that he tried to understand. The system announced a crucial discovery. 3 wishes had been located and were being calculated, initiating an irreversible change in his destiny. Shock ran through his body like an electric current. His eyes widened, completely awakened, as reality seemed to distort around him. Aaron awoke suddenly, screaming in fright. He realized, astonished, that he was no longer in the dungeon, but sitting in a comfortable bed. Emil, still trying to process the change, he turned to the window. The sight of a lush, peaceful landscape contrasted brutally with the hell he had been living moments before. A voice from the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Someone asked permission to enter, and Aaron turned, tense and wary of the new situation. The door opened, and a young maid entered. She gave a formal bow, showing respect, which only increased the boy's confusion. However, when she looked directly at him, the woman's expression changed. The formality gave way to genuine concern and immediate recognition. Without hesitation, she ran and hugged him tightly, shouting a familiar name. The young man froze, surprised by the sudden display of affection and relief. The maid stared at him with wide eyes, the concern palpable on her face. Aaron, in turn, just returned the look, confused by such closeness. The young man touched his own face, feeling his skin intact. A bewildered smile appeared as he tried to process whether this was real or some delusion. Suddenly, the woman's expression changed from concern to pure shock. The object in her hand slipped as she completely lost her composure. Her legs gave way, sending her crashing to the floor. The emotional weight of the moment seemed to have been too much for the servant to bear. Aaron looked down, startled by the dramatic reaction. He didn't understand why his awakening was causing such a collapse in the young woman. The contrast between her current attitude and memories of a dark past hung in the air. There was a history of fear and cruelty that explained that erratic behavior. Recovering slightly, the maid clasped her hands in prayer. She looked at him with a mixture of relief and disbelief, grateful that he was okay. The boy watched the scene, unable to grasp the context. He questioned her attitude, perplexed by the intensity of that emotional response. Aaron asked why she was acting so surprised at his recovery. The servant remained stunned, as if his nonchalance was something alien. As he dressed, the protagonist understood the gravity of the moment. Regardless of how it happened, he realized that he had been given a second chance to live. The memories of his previous agony and the disgrace he brought to his family still echoed. Momentary mistakes had cost him dearly in his past life. However, there was no time for regrets. His hands gripped the hilt of the sword firmly, determined not to waste this new chance. With the training weapon resting on his shoulder, Aaron prepared to leave. A renewed confidence shone in his eyes as he headed for the door. Outside, the towers of the Guardian training ground rose imposingly. The environment exuded the rigorous discipline of that place. Aaron watched the knights amidst their exhausting routine. He noticed the stern instructions regarding punishments and the increase in the day's exercise load. Aaron enjoyed the daylight. It felt surreal to be out there, away from the darkness he knew. He scratched his cheek, feeling a little out of place and trying to disguise his nervousness with a sheepish smile. Captain Raphael was already waiting for him. The warrior crossed his arms, clearly expecting yet another of the young master's usual excuses. While the protagonist smiled casually, the instructor exuded a dark aura of accumulated impatience. Raphael's irritation was visible. He forced a strained smile, barely able to contain his anger at the boy's light-hearted attitude. The captain began to reprimand him, but was interrupted. To his surprise, Aaron agreed to start training immediately, without complaining. The young noble seemed motivated. There was no sign of the usual laziness in his posture, just a sudden animation. Raphael was speechless. The sudden change in behavior was something he couldn't process at that moment. Aaron didn't wait for more instructions. He tightened his grip on the wooden sword, focused and assuming a combat stance. With a sudden burst, the young man advanced. His body moved to attack with unprecedented determination. He put all his strength into the blow, shouting to release the energy and channel his will into the sword. The wooden blade cut through the air in a vertical arc. Raphael watched the movement, surprised by the seriousness the boy was showing. However, the effort took its toll instantly. Aaron's face contorted in shock as he realized the extreme fragility of that body. His legs gave way and he fell backward. As he collapsed, his attention was fixed on something floating in the air that seemed invisible to others. The young man lay stretched out on the ground, panting. Exhaustion hit him overwhelmingly, as if that single movement had drained all his vitality. Aaron recoiled sharply, startled by the blue window that appeared out of nowhere in front of him. Captain Raphael, however, just shouted, not understanding the reason for that sudden shock in the middle of training. The young man tried to point to the strange dimensional trade menu floating in the air. Raphael, confused, made it clear through his expression that he saw absolutely nothing there. While Aaron tried to touch the holographic interface, the instructor watched him skeptically. To the captain, this just seemed like a delusion caused by the boy's extreme physical exhaustion. Suddenly, Aaron's expression changed. The initial fear gave way to curiosity as he realized that this vision was exclusive to him and no one else could interfere. Before his eyes, the blue light condensed rapidly. The system manifested in the form of a sacred book, shining with an ethereal and mysterious energy. The grimoire floated silently between the two men. Raphael continued his sermon, completely oblivious to the mystical object hovering inches from his face. The captain sighed, visibly disappointed with the noble's supposed frailty. He believed that Aaron's collapse and strange reactions were just a lack of stamina and discipline. Realizing the situation, Aaron decided not to insist on the explanation. The young man touched his shoulder, composing himself and pretending that it was just a passing discomfort. A subtle and confident smile appeared on his lips. He realized that this invisible secret could be an unexpected advantage, something no one else in that world possessed. Raphael, convinced that training was over for today due to fatigue, turned his back to leave. Aaron maintained his posture, satisfied to have concealed the true nature of the event. Back inside the mansion, the system continued processing the information registration around him. A servant approached, not noticing the digital interface and the phantom book accompanying the young master. The butler addressed him solicitously, probably offering something to recover his energy. Aaron heard the man's words, but his attention was divided with the supernatural phenomenon. Suddenly, a strange sensation hit his left eye. A bluish light emanated from his iris, indicating a direct and invasive connection with the system. Aaron sat down quickly, covering his face with his hand in a gesture of distress. He needed to hide that luminous anomaly before the servants noticed the drastic change in his body. Upon feeling the pulsation in his eye, disbelief struck him. The system was not just an external view, it was physically merging with him in a way he never imagined possible. Aaron stared at the floating object, astonished. A sudden understanding hit him as he tried to understand what had triggered that phenomenon before his eyes. The mysterious energy condensed into a digital interface. The system announced the immediate start of a dimensional trade, activating an unknown protocol. Upon reading the projected content, the young man absorbed the rules. He quickly realized that this power operated under the fundamental principle of supply and demand. The connection became physical and visceral. Aaron's left eye shone intensely, completely integrating with that strange magic. A plan began to form in his mind. The protagonist touched his chin, intrigued and pleased with the advantageous possibilities that the system offered. He focused his intention with clarity. This new ability was not just a vision, but a powerful tool that he was determined to use. A week had passed since the awakening. On the training field, Instructor Raphael looked exhausted and surprised by what he was witnessing. Aaron displayed a renewed vitality. The young man responded with vibrant enthusiasm, demonstrating a confidence he did not possess days before. He stood before the captain with a firm posture. Upon receiving the orders, Aaron confirmed his readiness. showing discipline and a new understanding of mana. A smug smile appeared on his face. The young noble seemed to be enjoying himself, keeping a secret that gave him an advantage over the others. Suddenly, Aaron initiated the attack. Raphael was caught off guard by the speed and determination of the blow, barely having time to react. The weapons collided violently. The impact generated a shockwave, proving that the young man's strength had changed drastically. Aaron did not cease the offensive. He continued pressing with a sequence of fluid movements, forcing the instructor to retreat defensively. Raphael barely dodged, visibly alarmed. In the background, the other knights watched the scene, shocked by the boy's sudden evolution. The training culminated in an explosion of impact. The force of the blow raised dust and debris, making the spectators scream for the young master in total disbelief. With a dull thud, the body was thrown to the ground. The fall kicked up dust, marking the abrupt and violent end of the physical confrontation. The spectators were paralyzed, with their eyes wide with disbelief. No one there could process that the outcome of the training had been so shocking. Aaron remained standing, emanating a calm that contrasted with the previous violence. He smiled slightly, feeling the new strength flow through his body without any hesitation. The training yard fell silent at the scene. While the young noble stood upright and victorious, his opponent lay defeated in the dirt. The instructor, sweating cold, stared into space, unable to understand the situation. The one he had always judged as a weak coward had, inexplicably, surpassed his abilities. With a cold and superior look, Aaron just waited. He didn't need excessive words. He just demanded that the reality of his victory be admitted. The tension between the other knights was palpable. They watched the young man with serious expressions, realizing that the power hierarchy they knew had been broken. Later, away from prying eyes, Aaron's focus shifted to his resources. He opened a chest full of riches, knowing he would need to finance his next steps. Alone in his chambers, he activated his unique ability. While holding the treasure, his left eye shone intensely, invoking the dimensional grimoire interface. The holographic menu appeared in the air, listing trade options that transcended physical reality. Aaron analyzed the buying and selling categories with strategic attention. The system initiated the evaluation process, using a mystical scale to convert physical matter into digital value. Luminous data floated while the calculation was made. Upon seeing the conversion result, Aaron's expression changed. The value offered by the system in special coins was much lower than what he expected for the physical riches. He then understood the complexity of the market. The value of common goods, such as gold or food, fluctuated drastically depending on the needs of each dimension. The young man realized that the administrators of that exchange were not naive. There were fees, restrictions, and penalties calculated to limit the profit from low-ranking transactions. Aaron crossed his arms, feeling the frustration grow. The path to power through dimensional trade presented a bureaucratic dilemma that he had not foreseen. Aaron started a conversation with a vendor named Heartstone through the interface. The merchant promptly assured him that his mana crystals were high quality, extracted directly from his own mine. Before proceeding with the negotiation, the young man decided to be cautious. He activated a specific system function to check the user's details and reputation. To his surprise, the system revealed detailed information about the seller's status. The report exposed Heartstone's cruel nature, describing him as a businessman who exploited his workers mercilessly. Aaron noticed that this reporting functionality was unprecedented, non-existent in his past life. Curious about the new tool, he decided to check the offered values before taking action. The system promptly displayed the average prices for the current channel. The comparison revealed that the actual market values were drastically lower than what was being charged. The attempted extortion was evident. The seller, who had promised an affordable price, was actually charging almost double the fair value, acting like a swindler. Instead of showing irritation, a cunning smile appeared on Aaron's face. He realized that he had the necessary advantage to manipulate the situation in his favor. The protagonist confronted the merchant, mentioning that the transaction ledger itself would prove the fraud. He threatened to formally denounce him as a con artist within the system. With the trap set, Aaron awaited the reaction. He knew that a blemish on his reputation would be disastrous for any merchant who depended on that market. The silence on the other end confirmed the seller's fear. Aaron increased the pressure, questioning whether he preferred to be negatively marked by the system or resolve the situation. the merchant's posture changed instantly. The arrogant tone gave way to desperate flattery, trying to appease the customer and avoid administrative punishment at all costs. Heartstone began to invent dramatic excuses. He claimed financial difficulties and falling mine profits, trying to evoke pity to justify his abusive prices. However, the system report told a different story. The description of the individual as a cruel exploiter of slaves made it clear that those tears were just cheap acting. Aaron was not fooled and coldly announced that he would cancel the negotiation. In total panic, the seller shouted for him to wait, immediately offering a half-price discount. The young man paused for a moment, calculating his victory. He had managed to break the merchant's greed and now had absolute control over the terms of the exchange. The transaction was successfully completed. Before Aaron's eyes, the system's light materialized the acquired items, making them float above the book. The system promptly identified the merchandise. First, low-grade mana crystals appeared, containing a modest reserve of energy within them. Soon after, the medium-grade crystals appeared. These, more valuable, possessed a significantly higher concentration of power. However, upon checking the receipt, Aaron noticed a discrepancy. The amount debited was less than the amount he had initially offered. The message box flashed. The seller on the other end of the line sent an explanation for this sudden change in values. Apparently, the merchant, still frightened by the previous blackmail, returned the change so as not to displease the customer. Aaron was surprised by such submission. The young man realized at that moment that his influence over the seller was much greater than he had calculated. Shrugging off the situation, Aaron closed the interface. The most important thing now was to use the resources he had just obtained. He held one of the crystals firmly. Feeling the energy being absorbed by his skin, he confirmed that the product was genuine and not a scam. Immediately, he entered a meditative state. Pure mana circulated through his internal channels, strengthening his spiritual core and revitalizing his body. Later, in the training yard, Aaron put his new strength to the test. He advanced with his sword against the instructor knight, applying what he had cultivated. The impact was devastating. The energy released in the blow shattered the defense with a thunderous sound, scattering fragments of power through the air. Aaron's eyes glowed with a golden intensity. He felt the success of the technique flow through him. The victory was absolute. Aaron completed the steel breath technique and defeated the knight, leaving himself and the spectators impressed with the result. The defeated instructor forced a smile to save face. However, the vein throbbing on his face betrayed the deep irritation of having lost to the young master. Aaron chose his target and called Mihail with enthusiasm, asking the man to trust him for what he was about to do. The knight hesitated, confused, but Aaron insisted on the choice. For the young master, that opponent was the exact measure to test his new limits in front of everyone. The scene did not go unnoticed by the eldest daughter of the Steelguard family, who watched the interaction with an authoritative posture. She intervened with a simple hand gesture, causing Mihail to immediately stop his objection to hear what she had to say. With a calm smile, the lady gave her permission, assuring the knight that he could accept Aaron's challenge without fear. The protagonist assessed his opponent coldly. He knew that Mihail, although classified as 6th class, possessed real skills that rivaled warriors of higher levels. Receiving his lady's approval, the knight hardened his expression and prepared to take the fight seriously, accepting the confrontation. The fight exploded into immediate violence. Aaron advanced relentlessly, unleashing a sequence of heavy blows that threw the knight backward, unable to maintain his defense. Panic arose in Mihail's eyes. He was sweating cold, unable to reconcile that overwhelming brute force with the image of the young master he knew before. Aaron allowed no rest. He dodged and counterattacked with surgical precision, completely dominating the rhythm of the fight and surpassing the knight's technique. XML. The final blow landed with a thunderous crash, raising a cloud of dust in the courtyard that obscured the battle's outcome from the audience. When the dust settled, the other knights and spectators were stunned. Their jaws dropped as they processed the swift defeat of an experienced fighter. The shock transformed into boisterous celebration. The men raised their arms and shouted Aaron's name in unison, acknowledging his supremacy and newfound strength. The young master remained standing in the spotlight, absorbing the victory and the looks of respect as the adrenaline from the combat began to subside. His concentration was broken by an unexpected gesture. A loving hand landed gently on his forehead, bringing him back to reality with a familiar touch. Aaron felt his sister's presence invade his personal space. She approached dangerously close, whispering words that carried the weight of old secrets and family tensions. The young woman explained the harsh reality of the Steelguard family. According to her, the clan's fundamental technique was forbidden to women, seen only as future outsiders destined for marriage, regardless of their talent. The past, however, told a story of injustice. Even demonstrating overwhelming innate potential and defeating opponents in training, she only ever received disappointment from her father for not being born a man. She placed her hand gently on Aaron's head. Wrongly believing that her brother's sudden strength came from pure effort, she expressed empathy for the supposed suffering he must have faced to get there. The woman then closed her eyes, hiding a deep pain. There was a silent resignation on her face, accepting that the legacy would pass to him despite her own competence. The protagonist remained still, sweating cold. He felt uncomfortable with the undeserved praise, knowing that his strength didn't come from the sacrifice she imagined. But he couldn't reveal the truth at that moment. Without saying anything else, Aaron's sister turned her back. She left the training yard, ending the conversation abruptly and leaving the young man alone with his thoughts and the instructor. As she walked away, however, her expression changed. There was a firmness in her gaze that suggested that despite the apparent resignation, the fire of her ambition and resentment had not yet been completely extinguished. Aaron watched her leave with seriousness. The young man realized that the demonstration of strength had stirred up the complex power dynamics within that house. Night fell over the castle, bringing with it silence and reflection. Until that moment, everything had occurred exactly as Aaron had planned when displaying his power. However, success brought its own dangers. The young man knew that the real problem wasn't the training, but the political and family consequences that would follow immediately. Proof of this was set at the table. Dinner was served with the usual pomp, but the candlelight couldn't disguise the tension that hung over the imminent meal. The family gathered in the great dining hall. The atmosphere was oppressive, with the silence broken only by the sound of cutlery and the discreet movement of the servants around. Aaron sat at the table, feeling the heavy gazes on him. This wasn't just an evening meal, but the stage where the judgment of his recent actions would take place. In command of the table was the patriarch. The man held his glass of wine with an unnerving calm, keeping his eyes lowered while his dominating presence filled the entire room. The family dinner proceeded under a heavy atmosphere. While the patriarch focused on his meal, the others present maintained a rigid and silent posture at the table. Suddenly, the head of the house broke the silence. He commented in a serious tone that the awaited moment had finally arrived. His stern gaze shifted to the other side of the table. The man's focus fell directly on the protagonist, who felt the immediate weight of that sudden attention. Aaron was visibly surprised by the approach. He didn't expect to be the center of attention in that way during dinner. The father touched his chin thoughtfully. He mentioned having heard about the level of the opponent the young man had just faced, analyzing the fact coldly. The blonde brother immediately intervened with disdain. He made a point of diminishing Aaron's victory, claiming that it couldn't even be considered a real sword fight. The mockery continued as he leaned over the table to emphasize his point. Beside him, the sister listened to the taunts with an expression of clear displeasure. The young noble insisted on his acidic criticisms. The woman, however, remained quiet, observing the family dynamic with seriousness and contained concern. However, the patriarch ignored the other son's scorn. To general surprise, he praised Aaron's performance, cutting through the mocking atmosphere with unexpected approval. The brother was stunned by the turnaround, falling silent immediately. The father then rose from his chair in a fluid motion, ending the verbal discussion. The man extended his open hand towards Aaron. The young man looked at that inviting gesture, stunned and uncertain about how to proceed in the face of that offer. With hesitation, Aaron decided to accept. He extended his own arm, touching his father's hand while trying to control the nervousness of the situation. The hands met in a firm grip. The touch revealed calloused and scarred skin, evidencing years of brutal combat experience that the father carried. But it wasn't just a formal greeting. Aaron felt the pressure suddenly increase and understood that the handshake was, in fact, a disguised physical test. The patriarch maintained an impassive expression and closed eyes. He silently assessed the resistance and strength that the son demonstrated in enduring his grip. The blonde brother watched the scene with evident contempt, awaiting any sign of weakness. The tension in the hall increased as the silent test between father and son progressed. The patriarch withdrew his hand, immersed in deep thoughts. He silently assessed the unexpected resistance that the young man had just demonstrated during the greeting. His eyes narrowed in critical analysis. The family leader realized that he was no longer dealing with the same fragile and submissive person as before. Aaron felt the weight of that silent judgment. He knew that the verdict of that moment would define his immediate future within that hostile house. To dissipate the heavy atmosphere, the protagonist scratched his head and forced an awkward smile. He tried to appear harmless and break the father's seriousness. The young man relaxed his shoulders, pretending the situation didn't affect him as much as it seemed. Calculated indifference was his best defense at that moment. The patriarch, however, found amusement in the carefree attitude. A subtle, arrogant smile appeared on his lips as he mentioned his son's wishes. With a tone of absolute certainty, the older man predicted that the young man would refuse the proposal, verbally testing his determination before everyone. While the father spoke with superiority, the rest of the family watched the scene with discomfort. The power dynamic at the table was shifting, to the surprise of those present. To emphasize his absolute authority, the patriarch focused magical energy in his fist. The air vibrated with the sudden and threatening display of power. Aaron swallowed hard at the veiled threat. The sight of that raw magic so close made him hesitate and fear for his safety. Despite the instinctive fear, the young man stood firm in his position. At the dinner table, he mustered the courage to declare his own petition. That audacity was unacceptable to the others present. The rival brother and his companion stood up abruptly, refusing to tolerate the situation for another second. The blonde man didn't contain his fury before leaving. He shouted insults at the protagonist, indignant at the attention the useless one was receiving. The patriarch remained still in his place. He merely watched the stormy departure of his revolted sons with a sidelong glance, without intervening. The siblings watched the scene with apprehension. The atmosphere in the hall changed dramatically after the silent confrontation. The older brother couldn't hide his irritation. He stared at the protagonist, trying to decipher what was going on in his mind in the face of that situation. Aaron, however, just smiled with disdain. He knew he had won that little psychological game and maintained his unwavering confidence. The silent provocation hit the target with precision. The rival gritted his teeth, furious at the audacity and composure demonstrated by the young man. But the focus of the narrative shifted quickly. A key turned in the heavy lock, granting access to something much more important than the family dispute. The doors opened, revealing a vast, illuminated treasure. The only condition imposed was clear and restrictive. He should choose only a single item to take with him. Aaron's gaze sharpened immediately. He needed to evaluate each option with surgical care so as not to waste that unique opportunity. The boy entered the room full of riches and artifacts. His mind worked fast, seeking to identify what would be the most powerful tool available there. He walked between rows of elite equipment. However, conventional shields and armor didn't seem to attract his interest or meet his needs. His attention suddenly turned downward. Among so many shiny objects on the shelves, something specific captured his curiosity. Aaron swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision. He realized that this choice would define his next steps, and there could be no mistakes. The patriarch, waiting outside, impatiently questioned if he was finished. With a firm posture, the son confirmed his final decision. The family leader couldn't avoid an expression of genuine surprise. He expected anything from the boy, except what he was about to see. The young man presented the chosen object with a slightly nervous smile. In his hands, he held a golden statuette, something that seemed out of place for an aspiring warrior. It was an item of immense financial value, but with no practical combat utility. In his father's eyes, it seemed like just momentary greed, an opportunity wasted for quick money. The blonde man watched the scene with total disbelief, unable to comprehend the choice made before him. Aaron, however, maintained a serene expression. He seemed to know something that escaped the other's understanding. While the rival waited arrogantly, The young man examined the golden artifact in his hands, ignoring the critical posture behind him. The man didn't contain his disdain, openly questioning Aaron's decision with words full of scorn. He continued his speech of superiority, certain that the protagonist was wasting a valuable opportunity in the treasure room. But Aaron just smiled enigmatically. He wasn't there to please anyone, but rather following his own rhythm. The rival assumed that the situation was under his control, believing that the object or the young man's submission would be destined for him. Suddenly, the man's gaze narrowed. Something in Aaron's defiant attitude planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He tried to disguise his discomfort by scratching the back of his neck, laughing at the situation to reaffirm his own confidence. It was then that the atmosphere changed for Aaron. A chill ran down his spine, and cold sweat appeared on his face. The young man turned abruptly, with his eyes wide with astonishment. Something was terribly wrong in that environment. His attention was captured by a detail on the side shelves. The surprise paralyzed his movements momentarily. The shock showed on his face. What he saw before him didn't match his memories or expectations. Aaron stared at the space in the corridor, trying to process the alteration in the scenario that should be static. A grimoire had been moved. The knowledge he sought wasn't where it should be, suggesting that someone had been there without his consent. Aaron delved into his thoughts, sensing that something crucial was out of place. He observed the emptiness of the room, internally questioning the whereabouts of the dimensional transaction book. Sitting at the table, the young man concluded that the inactivity of that specific book represented a monumental discovery for his plans. Suddenly, a luminous interface materialized in the air before him. The system emerged silently, hovering right in front of his face. Aaron's eyes widened. He could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The young man threw his arms open in denial, convinced that this should be technically impossible. However, the magical energy remained there. A nervous smile appeared as he tried to process reality. The glowing grimoire floated within his reach. Excited, Aaron realized that the object was interacting directly with him. However, a new notification surprised him, interrupting his train of thought. He stared intensely at the light. The whole situation seemed completely insane. The messages kept appearing, leaving him stunned by what he was reading. With a digital sound, the system completed the process, displaying his user profile. Aaron crossed his arms, satisfied. The system had just rewarded him with coins simply for checking in on the first day. The joy was instantaneous. The young man couldn't contain his euphoria and celebrated the easy reward with a ridiculous dance. Aaron's eyes shone with an unearthly light. He could barely contain his fascination with the magical phenomenon unfolding before him. A confident smile curved his lips. The young noble realized he finally had a real and powerful advantage in his hands. The system materialized a small golden statuette wielding a sword. Aaron held the object, recognizing it as a valuable reward. The piece was placed on a magical evaluation platform. The luminous mechanism began to process the item, calculating its value or function with a confirmation sound. However, the system's reaction left Aaron momentarily confused. He watched the process with a narrowed eye, trying to decipher the analysis result. The statuette finally stabilized in the holographic interface. The evaluation was complete, and the item was accepted by the system. Overcome with emotion, Aaron hugged the little treasure to his chest. The reality of that achievement and its potential hit him with full force. Later, already in his chambers, he dedicated himself to studying the interface. The young man navigated the luminous menus, seeking to understand the extent of his new resources. Aaron collapsed on the bed, completely in disbelief. The monetary value suggested by the system was so high that it seemed like an absurd joke. He remained lying down, staring into space as his mind processed the shock. That resource could change everything. Suddenly, a new idea made him wake up from his reverie. He sat up with a start, turning his immediate attention to the digital grimoire. His gaze sharpened with intensity. Aaron had found a crucial detail in the fine print of the magical system. The sound of an alert broke the silence of the room. The boy watched the new system window with an expression of calculated curiosity. Relaxed, he rested his face in his hand, visibly pleased with what he was reading. The information presented opened up a range of strategic possibilities. The young man continued to analyze the content calmly and with a smile on his face. That knowledge would be the key to rewriting his destiny. The glow of the digital interface reflected in Aaron's eyes as he analyzed the information before him. With a confident smile, the young man reached out to manipulate the holographic panel and begin his plan. Elsewhere, a merchant held a glowing cube, wondering about the identity of this mysterious customer. The man's expression quickly transformed, going from curiosity to absolute shock. The screen identified the seller as Hearthstone, who soon recognized Aaron from a previous interaction. The protagonist, however, maintained his arrogant posture and questioned what the other had to offer. The young man's blatant attitude made the merchant's frustration begin to simmer silently. Oblivious to the tension on the other side, Aaron hummed a tune, enjoying the progress of the negotiation. The seller felt powerless and humiliated, realizing that the young man was just playing with him. Without hesitation, Aaron ended the conversation with a direct order to buy all available stock of crystals. The system processed the massive transaction immediately, confirming the payment and acquisition of the items. With the deal done, the young man stretched with boredom, deciding it was time to get some rest. The shock of that operation was so intense that the merchant dropped his pipe to the floor with a crash. He stood up furious, indignant at the audacity of that commercial maneuver in the same sales channel. Meanwhile, Aaron was surprised by a sudden flood of messages, confused by the repercussion of his actions. Aaron watched the aggressive messages popping up on the holographic screen. The tone of the conversation had quickly deteriorated into direct insults. However, the young noble just smiled at the hostility. That explosive behavior seemed to amuse him, as if it were all part of a game. Suddenly, Aaron raised his voice, reacting with an exaggerated intensity that contrasted with his previous calm. On the other side of the communication, the merchant was visibly stunned. The abrupt change in attitude caught him off guard. Aaron seemed to be having fun at the other's expense, recalling the temperamental peculiarities of that specific species. The seller, in turn, felt a deep and irrational irritation. Something about the boy's posture completely set him off. Regaining his composure, Aaron turned his attention back to the interface, swiping his finger across the panel with an air of superiority. The merchant's messages kept coming, trying to dictate rules of ethics about resale and fair prices. The white-haired man crossed his arms and turned his face away, stubbornly refusing to proceed with the negotiation. Aaron read the final refusal. The seller was willing to lose the deal just because he didn't like the buyer's attitude. Relaxing in bed, the young man launched his final argument. He questioned whether hurt pride was worth more than the fortune being left on the table. With a victorious smile, Aaron revealed his current balance and the special subsidy privileges that the system guaranteed him. The seller was shocked to realize the boy's purchasing power. The scale of the proposed transaction was much larger than he imagined. Aaron didn't hesitate to confirm his decision. With the path clear, he declared his intention to acquire absolutely everything that was available. The merchant incredulously questioned the origin of that fortune, mocking the boy's supposed financial ignorance about transaction fees. Aaron, however, just set his cup down firmly, ending the one-sided discussion with a decisive gesture. The young noble ignored the insults, drinking his tea indifferently while his mind was already planning the next step. Without hesitation, he manipulated the system interface, securing the purchase of the available mana crystal stocks. With a quick gesture, Aaron dismissed the holographic windows. The deal was done, and it was time to focus on training. Later, in his chambers, the protagonist stared at the blue stones. He knew he needed to practice mana breathing in every free moment. Sitting down to meditate, he reflected that physical training alone would not be enough to overcome his slow initial progress speed. The memory of his ancestor loomed over him, reminding him of the pattern of true genius that he needed to achieve. Aaron concentrated deeply, sweat dripping as he forced his internal energy to circulate through his body. Upon finishing the exhausting session, the young man washed his face with cold water, cleansing the fatigue accumulated from the mental effort. He observed his reflection in the mirror and found that, fortunately, the development was proceeding according to his rough calculations. A smile of satisfaction appeared on his face as the intense effort was generating the expected fruits. His eyes shone with a new intensity, evidencing the growing control and stabilization of his power. While the imposing mansion remained silent on the outside, a fundamental change was occurring within. Suddenly, the system reacted with a notification. He had met the requirements, unlocking a new level and the mysterious Eye of Providence. The effort paid off. The system congratulated Aaron on his advancement, confirming that he had reached a new level of power. Energy flowed through him, manifesting physically. He felt the change occur within his own being. New functions were unlocked, including accelerated learning and access to events. He realized that this system could level the playing field between commoners and knights. However, something on the red interface caught his attention. A specific notification made him stop. The young man was confused. The information presented didn't seem to make sense in that immediate context. He stared at the list of events, but found only digital silence. It seemed like something was missing or incomplete. Aaron massaged his temples, disappointed. The exchange center's initial offers seemed completely useless for his goals. Sitting on the couch, he continued to analyze the holographic panel. There had to be some real use in it. Suddenly, the screen glowed and reacted. A new activity began to emerge before his eyes, altering the previous pattern. A flood of VIP promotions and clearance events inundated his vision. The system offered massive discounts and exclusive opportunities just for him. A smile of satisfaction appeared on his face. He realized that those secret offers completely changed the situation in his favor. But then, his eyes widened in shock. Something unexpected was about to happen. A red envelope materialized from the holographic projection, shooting swiftly in his direction. Aaron watched, astonished, as the digital reward became tangible before him. The content was extraordinary. Years of internal energy, an elite martial art, and system points. He had received a complete package for his ascension. The young man watched, stunned, as the system rewards materialized in the air. Besides a gleaming pile of gold coins, a red scroll emanated an aura of palpable power. Without him needing to touch it, the mystical document reacted to his presence. The scroll unfurled violently, releasing the energy sealed within. The crimson essence began to circulate around Aaron, moving as if it had a life of its own. He followed the flow with his eyes, realizing that the learning process had begun. Suddenly, the energy converged directly on him. Aaron instinctively brought his hand to his face when a burning sensation hit his left eye, marking the beginning of assimilation. The intensity of the power was overwhelming. The young man gritted his teeth, feeling the technique invade his senses and rewrite his understanding of the flow of mana. Recovering from the initial shock, his attention turned to the next item. Upon holding the glowing vial, a smile of understanding appeared on his lips. He knew exactly what it meant. They were cultivation resources of exceptional purity. The crystals and elixir pulsed with a bluish energy, promising to accelerate his strengthening drastically. In his mind, the structure of his internal energy was projected with clarity. He visualized his current state, a calm and stable base, ready to be expanded. However, the new technique demanded a transformation. The mental projection changed, indicating that his core would need to withstand intense heat to evolve to the next stage. An ancestral glimpse invaded his consciousness. He saw the imposing figure of a warrior wielding a radiant blade, the very embodiment of the martial art he had just received. There was no time to lose. Aaron immediately sat in a lotus position, concentrating to refine the turbulent energy and absorb the benefits of the items. The trance was deep, but brief. When his eyelids opened, a remnant of the red energy still danced in his gaze, signaling the success of the integration. He stood up, feeling a powerful aura emanate from his body. The vitality that now coursed through his veins was incomparable to his previous state. Aaron put his hand to his chest, feeling his heart beat strongly. The effectiveness of that instant of evolution was much more surprising than he had dared to imagine. His eyes gleamed with a new determination. With that newly acquired power, the confidence that he could alter his tragic destiny finally solidified. The young man visualized the wealth he would need to accumulate. Gold would be a fundamental resource to sustain his future plans. With the preparations finally completed, Aaron decided it was time to advance to his first real objective. The path led him to the entrance of a dark cave. From there, a voice echoed, showing revulsion for affectionate feelings. The interlocutor revealed himself to be a hooded man who, holding a shining tome, reprimanded the visitor's informality. The mysterious figure sighed, showing clear impatience and disdain for the boy's presence. The digital analysis dissects the target, revealing Irun as a simple level 1 human. The system recognizes his decent training as a warrior, but the exposed data only reinforces the mediocrity that the mysterious figure had already sensed. With an unsettling smile and a look of pure intrigue, the mysterious figure demonstrates a predatory interest in the visitor. He casually inquires about the type of martial art desired, probing the ambition of the one before him. The predatory curiosity gives way to a visceral blow, silencing any immediate response. A trickle of warm blood runs down as proof of the sudden violence, while the air is stolen from his lungs in an agonizing gasp. The silence is broken only by the wet, rhythmic sound of vitality fading away. Gravity takes its toll, staining the cold floor with irrefutable proof of the damage inflicted. Far from showing remorse, a smile of pure satisfaction curves his lips as the power awakens. An overwhelming energy inflames his gaze, revealing that the true predator in the room has just taken control. A torrent of trivial words breaks the tension as explanations are given with an almost irritating enthusiasm. The figure chatters incessantly, punctuating every detail with a lightness that ignores the gravity of the situation. The prospect of profit makes rationality evaporate instantly. Hypnotized, he indulges in blatant greed, drooling before the golden opportunity that presents itself. However, the euphoria of greed gives way to an abyss of despair. Crushed by reality, he shrinks under a heavy cloud of depression and instant regret. Self-pity disappears in an instant, replaced by a latent irritation that he tries to mask with a strained smile. However, the facade of cordiality is too fragile to contain the murderous aura that begins to leak from his gaze. The shadows of the hood are not enough to hide the malice that now overflows from his features marked by time. The restrained smile ceases to be a sign of courtesy, to become the silent harbinger of a trap about to be sprung. Aaron kept a serene expression, aware that his presence there caused a calculated impact. He projected his aura intensely, making his image seem gigantic and oppressive before the sect leader. Tension hung over the Juxan sect in the fifth world of Murim, where the hierarchy was about to be challenged. The sect leader's eyes widened, processing the audacity of the words he had just heard. Unable to contain his frustration, the old master slammed the table, demanding guarantees before accepting any negotiation. While the leader questioned the validity of the proposal, his subordinate read the scroll, visibly tense with the unfolding situation. The young Steelguard, however, was not intimidated. He crossed his arms and declared that he had no time to answer so many trivial questions. The glow in his left eye pulsed, a silent sign that his patience and power were active. The sect master pointed his finger accusingly, trying to unravel the true nature of that insolent visitor. With a careless shrug, Aaron repeated his simple offer: Hakshiol Lee's life, in exchange for what he wanted. Upon hearing his fate being treated with such levity, the man mentioned felt the weight of fear. To demonstrate total control over the environment, Aaron brought the cup to his lips and drank his tea calmly. The leader leaned back in his chair, anger giving way to a sudden understanding of the origin of that strange power. Aaron's gaze intensified as he realized that his secret was being deduced by the interlocutor. With his hands clasped and a serious expression, the old master stared at the young man, completely reassessing the threat before him. Aaron sipped his tea calmly, maintaining his serene posture while awaiting the unfolding of the negotiation. However, his composure was broken by a sudden choke, spitting out the drink in the face of an unexpected surprise. A magical light shone over his left eye. The young noble immediately recognized what that meant. The sect leader watched the scene with suspicion, intrigued by the boy's sudden change in behavior. Aaron ignored the other's gaze and clasped his hands together, totally focused on the message that only he could see. The revelation that appeared before his eyes left him stunned. It was information he did not expect to receive at that moment. The system detailed the truth. That man had disfigured his own face to hide his identity and went by the nickname Muheoja. Aaron's mind glimpsed that individual's past, imagining him writing frantically, trembling with frustration and fear. He perceived the intensity of the hidden emotions, the shame and the secret that master kept under lock and key. With the knowledge of the pain the opponent had endured, Aaron realized that he had just gained an overwhelming advantage. The young man promptly accepted the mental chat request. By mentioning the name Muheoja, The connection with the interlocutor named Seok Hyun was established. The response was immediate. The mention of that specific name made the other party stop to verify the authenticity of the contact. A status window appeared, overlapping the view of the real world. The data confirmed that the old master was, in fact, a system user in that world. A victorious smile lit up Aaron's face. Armed with that privileged information, he knew he had total control of the situation. Oblivious to this, the master adjusted his glasses and brought his hand to his head, appearing suddenly exhausted by the course of the conversation. The sect leader felt offended by the comparison. He coldly warned that the boy was crossing a dangerous line. Aaron, however, just laughed at the threat. The young noble kept his eyes fixed on the holographic screen, demonstrating total confidence. He analyzed the data on the martial arts displayed in the system, ignoring the tension in the air. Muheoja blinked, surprised. The boy's audacity and strange behavior caught him off guard. The protagonist smiled openly. He knew he had enough information to turn the tables. Suddenly, Aaron's eye glowed intensely. He activated his special ability to read the master's hidden truths. The young man then corrected the older man, citing exact numbers that contradicted his arrogant stance. The martial arts master listened in silence, reassessing the situation as the golden glow illuminated the table. Aaron continued to dictate the facts exposed by the system, dismantling his verbal opponent's secrets. A smirk appeared on Muheoja's face. He let out a low laugh, finding the situation amusing. The man clasped his hands together, enchanted. He decided right then and there that he couldn't let someone so intriguing escape his grasp. With his objective achieved, young Steelguard tapped the interface to end the data viewing. Later, in his chambers, Aaron sat down exhausted as the red aura of his power slowly dissipated. Hearing a knock, he turned his face. Still with his eye glowing, he allowed whoever was outside to enter. The young maid entered the room, looking shy and apologizing for the sudden interruption. The young maid stopped suddenly, her eyes wide and an expression of pure shock on her face at what she saw. Aaron, in turn, just watched her curiously, not immediately understanding the reason for such astonishment. The noble brought his hand to his face, feeling a pang of embarrassment as he realized the awkward situation he was in. To break the ice, he let out a loud, relaxed laugh, trying to dissipate the tension in the air. Then, Aaron struck an exaggerated pose, showing off his vitality to prove that he was full of energy. The young man's sudden and vigorous attitude left the girl visibly disconcerted, making her face flush. She quickly looked away, trying to hide her embarrassment with feigned indifference as she whistled. However, Aaron's playful expression disappeared in an instant, giving way to a focused and serious look. He then changed his posture again, radiating a deliberate charm to end the interaction lightly. With a satisfied smile and closed eyes, the young man seemed to consider the matter closed. The maid, however, remained confused, trying to process her master's rapid shift in behavior. The atmosphere grew heavy when a figure from the past appeared before him, invoking an old family hierarchy. The tension between the two was palpable, reflected in the cutting intensity of their crossed gazes. The next morning, the silence of the training ground was broken by the instructor's authoritative voice calling his student. Aaron turned immediately upon hearing the call, his attention sharp and ready for the challenge. The young noble faced his interlocutor with a defiant smile, ignoring the obvious tension in the air. The man in front of him, however, maintained a stern expression, clearly bothered by that carefree attitude. Aaron held his gaze, showing a confidence that seemed to provoke the other even more. He listened to the harsh words without being shaken, maintaining the composure of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The young man's serenity was the trigger for his opponent's fury. The blond man gritted his teeth, unable to contain his growing irritation at what he considered a personal affront. The atmosphere grew heavy between the two in the sunny courtyard. While the man tried to impose his authority with a rigid posture, Aaron continued with his light expression, refusing to be intimidated by the other's hostility. The opponent's patience finally ran out. The tension on his face betrayed that words would no longer be enough to resolve that impasse and that he was about to lose control. Driven by rage, the man resorted to physical aggression. He lunged forward, throwing a direct and violent punch with the clear intention of hitting Aaron's face. The protagonist perceived the hostile movement immediately. His keen instincts kicked in the exact moment the attack was initiated, his eyes following the trajectory of the blow. With an impressive reflex, Aaron ducked in a fluid motion. He dodged the blow with ease, letting the aggressor's arm pass harmlessly over his head. The blond man lost his balance momentarily, surprised to have hit only air. The excessive force he put into the attack ended up working against him, propelling him forward. Landing nimbly, Aaron internally questioned the reason for such aggression. The other's disproportionate fury didn't seem to make sense to him at that moment. The aggressor quickly regained his posture, turning to face the young man again. His gaze now mixed indignation with a renewed determination after the humiliating dodge. The man revealed the true source of his rancor, warning Aaron not to become arrogant just because he had received recent praise from their father. The family jealousy became evident in his voice. Determined not to fail again, he channeled magical energy into his fist. The next attack would not be just physical. He was willing to use real and dangerous force against his own brother. The power-laden blow was struck, but Aaron didn't back down. To absolute surprise, the young man intercepted the attack directly, blocking the energy with his own hand and generating a shockwave. Astonishment took over the aggressor's face. He broke out in a cold sweat, unable to believe that the one he underestimated was capable of stopping his attack with such firmness and technique. The fight continued with unexpected intensity. Aaron not only defended himself, but forced his opponent to retreat with a quick counterattack, creating distance between them. The blond man hesitated for a moment, incredulous. The cold sweat on his face betrayed that he had drastically underestimated the capabilities of the young man in front of him. Refusing to accept the situation, the instructor channeled magic into his fist. He questioned Aaron's posture, preparing to punish what he considered a carelessness in the boy's guard. Magical energy crackled dangerously close to Aaron's face. The young noble realized the gravity of the approaching attack, but remained focused. Aaron showed no fear. Instead of backing down, he shouted, preparing his body to intercept the hostile movement with calculated precision. XML. The attacker declared his intention to teach a harsh lesson. Arrogance fueled his strike, certain that magic would guarantee him victory in this confrontation. However, Aaron acted faster than the eye could follow. He slipped under his opponent's guard, dodging the brute force with a fluid technique. With a firm movement, the young man grabbed the man's outstretched arm. He used his opponent's own momentum as leverage, completely destabilizing his base. The world spun for the instructor. Aaron violently launched him into the air, executing a devastating throw that converted all the attack's energy into an aerial projection. Panic took over the blond man. As he floated uncontrollably, his mind went into shock, unable to comprehend how he had lost control of the fight so quickly. He thrashed in the air, helpless against gravity. The confidence he displayed moments before disappeared, giving way to the despair of the impending fall. The impact against the ground was brutal, raising a cloud of dust in the courtyard. As the opponent collided with the earth, Aaron landed with absolute balance and control. The young Steelguard watched the result in silence. His golden eyes conveyed a cold seriousness, without any trace of the weakness that marked his past. Stretched out on the ground, the man looked up, trembling and dazed. The reality of defeat weighed on him as he stared at the one who was supposed to be just a student. A nervous and embarrassed smile appeared on his face. Faced with that overwhelming display of skill, he realized that he was not dealing with an ordinary novice. The defeated opponent rose with difficulty, questioning whether the young noble had not exaggerated the demonstration of strength during the fight. Humiliated and still on his knees, the man demanded answers. He suspected that such sudden power could only have come from the family's secret vault. Aaron maintained his composure, listening to the accusations with an impassive look. He felt no need to justify himself to the envy of others. The instructor's frustration turned into shouts of disbelief. He refused to accept that the young man had gained access to the restricted files. In his opponent's mind, only the use of forbidden knowledge or hidden artifacts would explain that absurd disparity in skill. Later, in his chambers, Aaron ignored the squabble and focused on the real problem. He knew that entering the inner vault would be a much greater logistical challenge. A confident smile appeared on his face. The prospect of overcoming the security barriers seemed to amuse him rather than intimidate him. The maid, however, watched him with apprehension. She tried to speak, visibly worried about her master's recent and strange behavior. Her concern soon gave way to intense embarrassment when she realized that she had interrupted a moment of the young man's privacy. Aaron noticed her embarrassment and smiled naturally, maintaining a relaxed attitude to dissipate the tension in the environment. He tried to reassure her immediately, downplaying the violence of the previous training to ensure that she wouldn't worry unnecessarily. The young woman bowed respectfully and withdrew, leaving him to rest after the busy day, although she still seemed shy. Alone again, Aaron's mind returned to his main goal. He needed to create a concrete opportunity to infiltrate the inner vault. His gaze became sharp and calculating. The determination in his expression made it clear that he was already formulating a plan. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, the atmosphere was heavy. A man looked exhausted and defeated before a woman with a stern posture. The woman watched the young man carefully, noticing the subtle change in his posture and behavior. He, however, expressed his frustration vehemently, clenching his fists as he questioned the logic of that situation. Consumed by anxiety, the boy sat down, trying to find a way out, while she cautiously approached to intervene. The servant remained behind him, offering words that sounded like comfort, but carried a subtext of keen observation. In her thoughts, she concluded that he had changed. He was no longer easy prey, but rather a cunning and strengthened fox. His gaze sharpened, demonstrating that, despite the stress, his mind was working quickly to anticipate the next steps. He turned to her, listening to the advice with a mixture of distrust and need for alliance. With a confident smile, she finalized her reasoning, certain that her words would guide his actions in the right direction. Her eyes, however, revealed a calculating intensity, monitoring his every reaction to what had been said. Meanwhile, a crisis was exploding in the merchant's communication network. The alliance was in a panic over Aaron's sudden dominance of the market. The members of the group expressed shock and outrage, unable to understand how a novice was operating with such aggression and apparent loss. The consensus quickly emerged from the chaos. They needed to stop fighting among themselves and focus on eliminating that common enemy that was destroying their profits. The leader of the merchants stared at the screen with dark seriousness, realizing that the threat posed by Aaron would require an immediate and brutal response.